Unlearning proposes that new ways of learning can only be acquired when individuals unlearn those thoughts, those emotions, and those behaviors that prevent us from fully flourishing in the world.
2 weeks into this course, my heart already knew that my entire viewpoint on humanity was going to change.
During the years that I've worked with Taryn, she has assisted me in seeing the potential as an individual, and the course has changed my life for the better. I am the person that I am today because of the course that I enrolled for.
I've been lecturing the content for 7 years, and every year I am in awe of students who share how the content has transformed them both academically and personally. I believe that the world right now is in desperate need of an education that equips individuals with both academic and personal development skills.
Before this course happened, I used to hate people from the bottom of my soul. But after this course, for the first time in my life, I can say that I no longer hate people. I can finally say that I no longer see people for their circumstances, but rather for who they are as people and who they can become.
The things that I learned in my early childhood about who I was not and who I was supposed to be. However, the course showed me the true identity of myself. It showed me that it was okay to be vulnerable. It showed me that it was okay to heal. And throughout the course, I have grown tremendously.
And the Unlearning course does that. I realized that the content was so powerfully transformative that it would be irresponsible, that it would be selfish for me not to share it with the world. Unlearning is really a course that I've been lecturing for 7 years, but I've made it bigger, I've made it better, and I'm excited to incorporate the performing arts. I do not believe that unlearning needs to be clinical and boring. We can also make unlearning entertaining and fun.
To anyone that would want to enroll in this course, it will not only benefit you academically, but also individually. It will assist you in presenting yourself as the true individual that you are, but it will also assist you in healing and journeying the life process.
This course was the missing puzzle piece that I needed in my journey of self-transformation and self-discovery. And most of all, this course taught me how to unlearn this toxic behavior and how to choose happiness and positivity in the present and to stop worrying about tomorrow.
The gift of this course is that it is universally applicable to any personal and professional contexts. Cornerstone, learn to change the world.
In this time of great uncertainty, there's one thing you can be certain of: your education. Our wide range of online programs let you upskill yourself and earn a leading-edge qualification from the comfort of your own home. We've been educating Africa for 50 years, so we know how to adapt to our forever-changing landscape. Learn to change the world and take control today. Speak to one of our student advisors. Visit cornerstone.ac.za to enroll now.
Point 5. I love this station.
Hi, you're listening to the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues, a partnership between Bush Radio and Cornerstone Institute, a non-profit private institute of higher learning in Cape Town. For years, more than 100 of South Africa's top thinkers, intellectuals, and social activists have shared their thoughts and insights with Cornerstone audiences about how to overcome some of our toughest social, economic, and political challenges. They've looked at issues such as gender-based violence, urban food security, and the impact of COVID-19 on higher education. These debates are now coming to you via this 2-hour radio show, as well as streaming via Facebook and YouTube. It will also be edited into a 1-hour podcast for listening at your convenience. Hosted by veteran journalist Ryan Fortune, it will see a rotating lineup of guests, speaking on topics such as community health and wellness, the state of African book publishing, the viability of a basic income grant in South Africa, policing and gangsterism on the Cape Flats, contemporary Khoisan conflicts, the pitfalls and opportunities in the current state of the internet, and much, much more. We hope you enjoy these discussions and encourage you to call in with your thoughts, ideas, questions, and solutions at Bush Radio on 021 448 3277 or message us on Bush Radio WhatsApp at 061 862 1065. If you're watching our live stream on Cornerstone's Facebook page or YouTube channel, please feel free to leave your comments there.
Yes, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ryan Fortune. I'm your host this evening for the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues on Bush Radio 89.5 FM. We are here. It is Reconciliation Day on the 16th of December, and we are talking about local government and new approaches to service delivery in the wake of the recent local government elections. We've seen all the horse trading that's been going on over the last few weeks, but that was obviously preceded by the actual voting election day that caused so much ruckus in South Africa. Lots of changes it has wrought, and now we are dealing with the after effects, the impact, and the new year is going to bring lots of changes on the level of local government. In the studio with me today to discuss these issues and more, I have some very interesting guests. You're going to meet them very soon. I'll introduce them as we get into the show. Here we are, Cornerstone Critical Dialogues. another episode. I think this is the 11th or the 12th episode. And we are heading for another 3 or 4. The final one will be on the 6th of January for this run, this season. And looking forward to that. Anyway, as I said, local government politics, local government elections, service delivery. For the next 2 hours, we're going to be taking a deep dive into these issues, talking with people who have experience in the field, who are working to try and address some of the shortfalls and the gaps that exist, and also casting a philosophical eye, a sociological eye on the matter. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce my guests for this evening. From my right, I'll start with Stephen Langtry, who's going to be assisting me. Stephen is the head of social enterprises and faculty at Cornerstone, and I'll give him a chance to introduce himself. Stephen, will you introduce yourself a bit more? Just exactly what do you do at Cornerstone?
Sure. So good evening, Ryan and Kes. Well, I'm the manager in the office of the executive dean, and I'm also responsible for planning and for social enterprises at Cornerstone Institute.
Okay, and I believe you're also a writer.
Yeah, I am a writer. I sort of dabble in that occasionally.
Okay, fantastic. We're going to get into all of that a bit later. In the middle, I have with me in the studio with us is Daphne King, who is she claims to be retired. I believe, but she seems very active to me. She climbed up the stairs here without losing her breath. How are you, Daphne?
I'm fine, thanks. I am retired. I retired in 2016 after 45 years of work.
45 years of work in the field of housing and activism and council,
education and housing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're gonna hear from your long experience in the space, and on my left in the studio with me is Andrew Boraine. Andrew Boraine, who is the CEO of the Western Cape Economic Development Partnership, which is an organization which is trying to fill these gaps, do lots of things. Andrew, can you just give us some background on what the WCEDP does?
Thank you, Ryan. It's great to be here. And firstly, let me say it's so good to be here in the same studio as my old friend Daphne King. We first met and worked together in the early 1980s in the lead up to the formation of the UDF, a very important event in our country. So we go back a long way, and we've traveled a long walk together. The Western Cape Economic Development Partnership helps people work better together. One of the big stumbling blocks to improve development outcomes is that many institutions and many leaders, unfortunately, just simply do not know how to cooperate effectively. So we try and provide platforms for people to work together in areas and on particular themes.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Andrew. And on the line from Johannesburg, hopefully he's on the line, but let's see if we can actually get him on the line. We've had technical problems these last 2 weeks. We couldn't get people on the line, but let's see if Leslie Dikeni is on the line. Leslie, are you there? Leslie, can you hear me? Oops. Leslie.
Yes, right.
Can you hear me there? Can you hear him? I think you're on the line, yes. I think...
Ryan, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Ryan.
You can hear him, right?
We can hear him.
Oh, no. Let's see now. Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, is that fine?
Yeah.
Okay, Leslie, will you just introduce yourself to the listeners and give us some background to the work that you've done, in particular the book that you wrote called The South African Development Perspectives in Question?
Okay, I'm Leslie Dikeni, South African. I studied at the university, born in Victoria West, a small rural town. I'm an urban sociologist. I'm an author of a couple of books. The one I think that is of relevance for today is South African Development Perspectives in Question, at which I do work on the generic South African development discourse. More particularly, I challenge current theoretical and methodological frameworks and conceptual frameworks of the South African development discourse.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we're going to be talking to you in a few minutes. Stay on the line, Leslie. Don't go away. Yeah. So here we are. It is a Thursday, wonderful Thursday evening towards the end of the year. Things are winding up, and so everyone's getting ready for Christmas, New Year, and all of those things. So we're going to deal with, I would guess, what some people might assume is quite a weighty subject, on this Reconciliation Day. But I think it has some relevance to reconciliation in the sense that it really is a question. We always have these events, these days that we celebrate our South Africanness and our citizenship and all of these things. But what does it really mean in practice? Are we reconciled to each other? Are we happy about the state of the nation that we live in? Do we trust the institutions that have been that we've chosen to decide and basically have some kind of impact on our lives? Are we happy with the service that we are getting for our taxpayer money? So these are some of the questions we're gonna be talking about and learning and hearing from people who are in the space. So just to get things going, maybe I want to maybe just dive a bit deeper into people's personal sort of background and history in this space. So maybe I think we'll start with you, Daphne. If you could maybe just give the listeners a sort of a broad sense of your work from education and how you got into the issue of housing and why that was your chosen space for such a long time.
Thank you, Ryan, and thanks, Andrew, for that introduction. Yeah, I was very involved in 1971. I don't think even your parents were around.
My parents were around. I was not around in 1971, but I was almost there. I was probably, I was on the way.
Okay, so I started off as a young Christian worker, and with the in the church, the whole thing was you see, judge, act. You look at the situation where people find themselves in factories and in workplaces, and you judge. That's what the church taught us, and then we acted, and that was a forerunner for what we became very aware of workers' struggles. I started teaching in 1971, and I went to all these CAFEF meetings and SPEF meetings and read enough, and then of course 1976 exploded on us, and I met a couple of friends, and we assisted students who were arrested in 1976 and gave them bail money and so on. And as the years rolled by, 1980 came along, and we assisted students with I was a teacher at the primary school in Athlone. But we started the Concerned Teachers Organization, then the Teachers Action Committee, then it became WECTU, then it became SATU. So in a sense, we built organizations from scratch. And the one organization we built from scratch was CAYAC, the Cape Areas Housing Action Committee, which dealt with rental issues, service delivery issues, and so on. And I then left Athlone North, went to Rogebaai Teachers Training College and became a lecturer. And Kada Asmal then closed all the colleges in 1997. And but by then I was already a councillor. I had been elected onto the council in 1995, nominated by the Communist Party nogal.
Fantastic.
And and in 1996 I was elected as a PR councillor. I think I was number 6 or number 7 on the list. The slate.
So just quickly, you were elected, you were nominated by the Communist Party.
Okay, 95 was an interim
Did you
council.
were you a card-carrying member of the party at all?
Not really. They just didn't.
Yeah.
The 95 was an interim council. So you had your management committee people there, and you would know the management committee people, Communist Party, ANC, National Party, Democratic Party, whatever. So they were all there in 95, but in 96 was the first democratic elections for local government. And obviously, we had PR councillors and we had ward councillors. I was a PR councillor. I was number 6 on the list. And we were elected into being. But what struck me was on that first day in June in 1995, and I walked into that plush carpet, and I realized the immense responsibility that lay on my shoulders. We decide whether people pay rent, how much rent they pay, how much electricity they pay. And that for me was the most telling moment, that I was a councillor. I actually decide people's fate. I am responsible for people's lives, and it is an awesome responsibility. And that for me, when I see what happened in the bloodbath on the 1st of November, you realize that people don't actually understand their role as councillors. And that for me is the most telling point. Anyway, I became a councillor, and I was a councillor for 5 years. Politics is not for me. I'm not going to agree and vote with people if I don't agree with them. I sit on my hands and I will not. So there were lots of issues, and then a job came up in the council, and Andrew Boraine was the city manager at the time. Sorry. And I applied for the job, and I got the job as the manager existing housing. Now, as an activist, I was heavily involved in Hanover Park, Manenberg, Guguletu, Langa, with housing issues. Suddenly, I'm the manager existing housing. I'm in charge of those houses. The world is round. I sat there, looked at my staff, and I thought, this is it. I can do something. But the bureaucracy, the red tape, the unbelievable issues that you have to deal with on a daily basis in your work and with the community can also drag you down. So I became the manager of existing housing, and I stayed in housing for almost 20 years, which is quite a long time. And I enjoyed, because I worked with province and I worked with National Department of Housing, and I eventually chaired the allocations committee, which is not an easy job, of the N2 Gateway. So in a sense, that's what my career was all about. I left housing eventually. I became the communications manager. And the point I want to make, I don't know if you're going to ask me this, maybe you will ask me later, but I actually think that local government elections should be depoliticized, that we must take out the party out of the politics, that people must be elected on merit. They must come from the community. There was a woman in Bonteville, I don't know what her name was. She stood as an independent, but she obviously couldn't beat the DA. So it wasn't her who lost. It was the fact that she was an independent. And I'm saying, take politics out. We don't need the DA, the ANC, and this proliferation of parties. I mean, it's an insult to us to have so many parties. When you look at that paper, you don't know who to vote for. It's a joke. And I think the IEC needs to sort that out as well as the government, that we need to take out politics out of local government elections.
Yeah.
But
okay, we will come to all of that perspective and maybe a bit later. Controversial, I would think, but let's see. I don't know if it's gonna happen, but I on some level I agree with you. But how do we change it? So let's think about that a bit later as well. Leslie, I want to come to you on the line. Leslie Duquesne, are you there?
Yes, right. Yes.
Leslie, your book presents a sort of a very interesting perspective, and I think sort of maybe a more qualitative view on the issues of development. Can you just give for our listeners and the other guests in the studio a sort of a framing of what led to the book and what do you actually do in the book? What did you do in the case studies that you actually went and explored?
Well, the book deals with a number of. Well, first of all, Ryan, what's your name? Daphne. Daphne. It's good to hear your voice. It's good to hear about YCW. I hope you remember Albert Nolan and his works, God in South Africa.
Yes.
I hope you remember people like Shepard Marty,
yes,
who were involved during that time. Now you are talking to someone who comes from that history too, who worked very closely with those organizations before. So I think I've set the record straight. I'm with you. Think with me.
Fantastic.
The book is actually a book that really says, think with me, right? On the South African development discourse in South Africa, at which I challenge the current concepts of development that are existing in the country, and also especially the generic approach to what is treated as development, because the issue of development in South Africa really is intertwined to other theories of development in the world, right? And particularly, and the most important critique since the 70s, even the 60s, even in Europe, you had similar practices. But the key point in development that has been a critical point of critique, in fact, was the fact that that way of doing development in a top-down way is absolutely wrong. So that's what the book really starts off with. And therefore, then it looks at South African development perspectives during the apartheid and colonial era. It then goes back from that. It then, and I'm going to use the word paradigm, right, by Thomas Kuhn. Thomas Kuhn always argues that we lose paradigms, but we regain paradigms. And sometimes the word paradigm itself, the concept paradigm itself, can depict positivity and negativity. Now, the apartheid paradigm was obviously a very disastrous paradigm, historical era that we faced with. Post-1994, we had to develop new theories that can deal with the South African development perspective, which meant we had to deal with racial inequalities and so on and so on and so on. So what the book seeks to do is taking a number of case studies. One is a case study on Buffelsdorp in the Eastern Cape. The second one is a case study in the Northern Cape, Kuruma, those areas and so on. And then the third one is a case study. Okay, we can carry on. I mean, I think the reader, the listener must read the book and then be able to see. But what they all seem to depict is that post-1994, the South African development paradigm actually similarly took the same way of development that was existing pre-1994. So I critique that as I say that these perspectives, these development approaches were existing in Europe as well, and they failed. So I critique that and I put that into the fore. But beyond that, remember now we're also in the era of a post-Cold War, right?
Yes.
So it's the era of a post-Cold War, and globally, everyone will agree that that era of the post-Cold War suggested one amongst other things, that we need to develop new theoretical and conceptual ways of looking at the world. We cannot look at the world as in black and white anymore. Things became complex. And therefore, we needed to understand the world in a different way. But equally in South Africa, post-1994, we needed to start rethinking and developing concepts in South Africa that can be able to change the socio-economic development process in South Africa. A very complex issue. In other words, it meant we also have to rethink how we understand state and civil society relations, right? And by that, I mean, we do not have to think of state and civil society relations in a dichotomized way. In other words, in a way of looking at a bad state and a good citizen, or vice versa, good citizen, bad state. But that we needed to find a different theoretical framework that does not seek to create or see South African development discourse from binary opposition. Metaphorically speaking, what I'm saying is that it's a post-colonial state, and we have to admit and accept that it is a post-colonial state. There was a democratic dispensation that was voted by the citizens, and it was there. That state existed, whatever its faults are, whatever it is. But the idea of looking at these two in terms of binary oppositions is old theoretical frameworks of analysis, right? Because once you do that, metaphorically speaking, you are doing what I normally say, the John Wayne movies of a cowboy and a crook.
Yes.
Here's a good cowboy and there's a crook there. So it's a very simplistic way. Because 1994 threw us into a serious number of complexities, right? Hence, I suggest in the book that we must allow, old ideas must give way to new ideas. And therefore, then the challenge for intellectuals and other development practitioners in South Africa is to rethink conceptually and theoretically how we deal with the South African development discourse.
Thank you, Leslie. I would agree with you on a lot of the issues that you raise. And I want to maybe throw this to Andrew, this maybe to respond to what Leslie just said. Do you agree with him that we have somehow our theoretical frameworks have been sort of lacking or inappropriate maybe for the times that we found ourselves in, and maybe then link it to the work that you guys are doing?
Thanks, Ryan. I mean, firstly, I'd certainly agree with Leslie that this is an important opportunity to completely rethink our notions of the developmental state and what is a capable state. Because I think we've learned the hard way that some of the aspirations and ambitions that we had back in 1994 when we were designing the new state, and many of us were going into the new state to try and run it, we've learned the hard way, it's not so easy. Gives you grey hairs.
As Daphne was saying, it's all the red tape in there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk about regulatory compliance as a big problem just now, but I think that there have been many. Let's face it, there have been many disappointments. I mean, and the question we've got to ask ourselves right now is why are citizens, South African citizens, so disaffected from the state, as in the last local government elections, as in a sense, vaccine hesitancy. People don't believe government anymore. I'm talking about top to bottom. It's not just one party or another party. I'm talking about it as a collective whole. The hollowing out of our state through corruption and state capture, and the seeming culture of impunity that people can get away with anything. That's the first thing. People are just bitterly disappointed with that. Secondly, dysfunctionality and collapse of many local authorities, as many local politicians, as Daphne was saying, kind of pursue anything other than a developmental and societal supportive role. I have a good colleague who's been a former municipal manager, and he's now deployed by National Treasury to go in and try and turn around the fortunes of a particular local authority that has collapsed. He has to do it with armed guard from 4 policemen to do his job in that particular area. It's run by local criminals. That's how bad it has become. So imagine the citizens in that local area, what they're experiencing. And then there's also talking more about the local state now, but it could be applied to other spheres of government. Some departments, some municipalities are functional, but they're not very effective. And I think because what we've come in with this pernicious, we've tried to respond to dealing with the corruption and the state capture side with a whole lot of regulatory measures. I can understand that, but what it means is to work in government now means that it's governance for government, not governance for service delivery and governance for society. And many of the institutions that we work with in the public sector, you've got to look at the culture, not just the structure and the systems and the laws, but the culture is inward looking at processes and getting those right. And a clean audit is more important than delivering services now, unfortunately, in many examples that one can give. And the culture then also looks upwards to politicians and their parties, or upwards to auditors and scopers and oversight and, dealing on, delivering your deliverables and your per indicators. Very little engagement with communities, very little responsiveness to communities, very little flexibility in dealing with difference affirmatively. And so what we need now is I go back to Amartya Sen and the notion of government not just as a deliverer of services, but as an enabler of development. And currently the South African state is not an enabler, it's almost a disabler of people's developing themselves, because we need citizen-led development, not just government-led development. We need people to be able to start businesses or earn livelihoods. And particularly when it comes to informality, and half our citizens in this country live under conditions of informality, informal businesses, informal livelihoods, in survivalist techniques. Government, being so over-regulated, is no longer able to engage with informality. So we've got to rethink. And I'm happy to come back to it.
So that's the state of where things are at. Do you have any comments to make?
Yeah, I was going to ask Stephanie maybe to expand a bit, because as we were talking about, Leslie and Andrew were beginning to touch on this idea of moving away from existing frameworks. Daphne, you mentioned a sort of a different vision for local government as one which is moving away from political parties.
Yeah.
Do you want to expand on that? Because I think that's quite an interesting idea, because after the last local government elections with all this low voter turnout, people are asking, so what's the point of local government then? If people are not going to participate in it, what credibility does it have? So how can we restructure or reimagine local government to get people more involved?
Firstly, I think local government is the most important government there is, because it's hands-on and it deals with daily issues. I mean, your councillor is the man down the street or the woman down the street. And I'm saying that the communities need to select their own leaders. We've got people in neighborhood watches, we've got people in community development forums, we've got people in the churches, we've got people now called ladles of love and what have you, where people are feeding each other. There are leaders in the community. The community can decide on who their leaders should be and vote on them and then let them go to council. You don't need a political party or several political parties to run a local government. We can debate that. We can have a workshop on it. We can have a commission. In South Africa, that's what we do. We have commissions, and discuss how can the local government become a government of the people, for the people, so that when my bin is not picked up on a Monday, I phone the councillor secretary and I complain, and then I phone the call center and she says, Mrs. King, do this, that and the other, and so on. And by Tuesday morning, my bin is collected. But I live in Kenburn, you see. But I've got a friend in Silvertown. They don't take notice of her. In Hanover Park, in Guguletu, they don't. So it's again the leafy suburbs that are being
getting the better services,
which is getting a better service,
more responsive government. Yeah.
Now I'm saying people should know their councillor, and they should vote for their councillor, and take politics out of it. And we also have too many spheres of government, but I'm going into another debate, And then, if government was run properly, why do we need Andrew's outfit? Why do we need a whole
another
body to assist government in doing their work? The other thing I want to say is that the role of the politician and the role of the official has become blurred. There's too much intertwining and cadre deployment. You don't cadre deploy an official. You appoint an official because of his or her skill, their level of education, and the fact that they can do the job. If they're going to go into housing, they need to be engineers. They need to be town planners. If they're going to go into finance, they need to be accountants. You're not going to get a plumber if you need a brain surgeon. So why do we appoint any old wishy-washy person as a CEO or a CFO in a local government when that CFO doesn't have any accountancy skills? Now that is my problem. So take politics out. How you're going to do it is your problem. I just think that there's too much of a blur, and that this whole point about deploying cadres into jobs where they need to build in checks and balances. They don't, because they themselves have been deployed and they're not capable of doing the work.
Leslie, you have a particular perspective in your book, which you talk about this notion of the actor-led situation. Can you expand a little bit on that? Where you talk about
it's the actor-oriented approach, social conception, right? At which really, I want to link this theoretical question to practical issues that definitely seems to be hanging on.
Yes.
But let me explain again. That basically what I'm suggesting is that we often tend to look at state and civil society relations in a homogenized fashion. We cannot do that any longer. There are no holy cows. Often people, and I remember very clearly, post-1994, and I did work and I contributed in the writing of the RTP. I was there at the time. It's now a different policy framework that everyone critiqued and so on, but it was a start for us in our country.
Yes, what happened to that? We'll come back to that, Leslie.
Okay, we'll come back. But anyway, so my conceptualization is that you cannot dichotomize, neither must you homogenize these two. You need to have an actor-oriented approach, which seeks to
what do you mean by that?
The various different social practices that each and every actor and every individual within the state, outside the state, within civil society. Civil society is not holy as we know now. We know about civil society not being as holy as we thought it should be. From events like SDGs, those were NGOs, created, existed. Now, you can't say to me that those NGOs involved in corruption are Holy Ghost, right? Neither can you, this does not say that the state is not itself, there are corrupt elements within the state. They are there, but you cannot brand all of them. As Daphne said, she worked pragmatically within the state. And as Andrew, I think, if I look at his bio here, has worked in the state. There are those. The challenge for intellectuals and for those who are development practitioners is to be able to find a theoretical method to analyze these problematics. That's what I seek to say in the book. The idea of a cowboy and crook story is no longer there because big business, because you can analyze these things from a macro and a micro perspective. You will find out, we know what created, for example, now the global economic crisis. It was not the state necessarily, it was big business. We know from the Zondo Commission, all the corrupt practices that we have seen that were taking place. Yes, a lot in the state, but also a lot within big business. So we have to look at these various different interests that are incompatible and be able to point out specifically who are those actors and analyze them accordingly, and thus be able to change and transform the bureaucracy of the state itself. That definitely is talking about. But equally, it's not only the bureaucracy within the state. Those practices exist in big business as well, and we know that, and we've seen it now. So we need to start thinking harder and harder and harder, and be able to find better ways. But a number of things that definitely has talked about, which I think, okay, I have sympathy for her concerns and worries and so on. There is no way, definitely, to assume that politics are not going to be part of development. Simply and purely because you need you need the state, you need the politicians in the game. What we need to be thinking is redefine state intervention. You can't wish away state intervention. It will be there with us. It has been there for us, and there will be no development with any state of intervention. That point also goes away to Andrew's point. You know, this kind of theoretical approach of assuming that the civil society must be there, and it's not going to work. You are going to have the state, Andrew, and especially in the South African historical context of colonial and racial divisions that existed in this country, and the uneconomic relations that exist within the country. You need somebody to intervene, and the state is at the best place to do so. But the issue is, how does the state intervene?
Okay. Thank you, Leslie, for clarifying that and raising those issues in the discussion. I want to maybe just turn to Andrew now, because Andrew, first of all, Daphne has said your organization it shouldn't be there, but obviously there's a need for it because we have these gaps. We have these issues, these challenges people feel really, as you said, disempowered. I was looking at something earlier on online, and in the lead up to the local government election, there were more than 1,000 service delivery protests across the country. People dissatisfied with the level of service delivery supposedly to be provided for them by government, and not happy, and obviously taking it out in destructive ways. The looting that we saw in Durban, there were obviously some politics involved in that as well, but generally kind of use the general dissatisfaction with the state as we know it, to rile people up and get them onto the streets and be very destructive in KZN and Johannesburg. So your organization really works to bring different interest groups together. Is that what it does? And maybe just tell us about some of the challenges in that process and that work that you do.
Thanks, Ryan. So let me in answering your question, also try and answer Daphne's question as well as Leslie's point. Firstly, Leslie, call me old-fashioned, but I'm still very much a believer in the role of the state. I think we are stuck, for better or for worse, with the modern nation state, and best that we try and use it for better outcomes.
Absolutely, I agree.
So we can't not deal with the state. And I was on a panel the other day with Mazibuko Shara, and he had a very nice notion, which I want to quote here, which I quite liked, because sometimes you're with the state, sometimes you against the state, and sometimes you're beyond the state. And I think you've got to hold those three things together. It's not one or the other; it's both and. And the way I understand how we could conceptualize the relationships, putting relationships back into politics, putting relationships back into the state. And the original concept 25 years ago of the South African state was a relational state between the three spheres of government, cooperative governance, and between the state and the people, participatory governance. That's how it was framed. That's the theory. Now, how do we put that into practice, given all the disappointments of the last 25 years? And I think that the way we see it is that one has this top-down authorizing environment, which can be a very blunt instrument. The state, one of its problems, because it's got a lot of resources and a lot of structures and a lot of rules and a lot of laws and a lot of politics and electoral cycles and very short-termist, it's characterized as quite a top-down authorizing environment. Now, you can't wish it away. You can't just have a populist slogan saying bottom up, because that's probably quite naive. The state will always be there and it'll always be relatively top-down. So the trick is, I think, how do you better connect the top-down authorizing environment of the stuff of government and the bottom-up mobilizing environment of activists and communities and non-state actors, non-state participants in society and the economies. And so you've got to intervene in both environments. Both environments have strengths and weaknesses. And it's not, Leslie, you're right, it's not a false dichotomy of bottom up or top down. I think it's both and, rather than a false binary there. In the top-down authorizing environment of government, how do we get both politicians and officials at all three spheres of government to focus outwards and downwards rather than inwards and upwards? And that's a cultural thing as much of it as anything else. Secondly, how do we create a more enabling and supportive environment within government for non-state actors? And the problem is that many people in government feel they're the only one doing development, and the communities are just sort of bystanders or almost subservient participants to state plans. When does government go to people and say, tell us about your plans and how we can help you? So, for example, in government, there's more and more units now around reducing red tape for business, or what is called ease of doing business. And that's fine. But what about ease of doing community development? Because there's so many restrictions for people wanting to better their own lives to get on with it in government.
Yeah, I mean, we saw, I think it was earlier this year, where this guy was, I think it was in Johannesburg, wanted to plant vegetables on the sidewalk and got arrested because he wanted to feed people in the neighborhood. I understand the issue about bylaws and people having access to the sidewalk, but I mean, it just brought to the fore again the sort of the sort of, I don't want to call it the stupidity of government, but maybe that's what it is. But like just the short-sightedness, of certain government departments around not looking at things in a holistic way or in a humanistic way. That was really my thing. This guy had some cause, which was a humane cause. He wanted to feed people, and he was prevented from doing that. So I think again, that short-sightedness.
Well, that's the cabbage bandit, and what the cabbage bandit is the exact example that one can use. There are some cities around the world, their default is, if you find a piece of spare land, plant vegetables, fruit trees, go for it, because that is how we help people survive and thrive in society. We, by default, do the opposite, saying, do not touch our land. We don't quite know what we're going to use it, and it takes us a hell of a long time to dispose of it or think of what to do, but it's our land as government. And that's just the wrong starting point. What are the needs of society versus the needs of this institution of government? Mm-hmm. And that's that we've got to turn it around. And that's why it's not wishing government away. Government has a hell of an important role in society, but I think it's wrongly why, for example, Daphne's point, why are people so unable to work across the aisle? As they call it in American politics, and they don't do it very well there at the moment, let's face it.
Yeah, no.
But we've inherited, Leslie, in a sense, the old British traditional system of politics, where if you're in power, you have 100% power, and then you have a leader of the opposition, and the leader of the opposition is there to critique those in power. That's actually a very unproductive way of developing anything in society, because you either on the defensive all the time by the critique of the opposition, and when it flips around, you do the same to them. And it's a very small-minded politics. So I think we need a different culture of politics. I disagree with Daphne. I don't think we're going to wish away the political parties, but I agree with her intent there. If the sole purpose is just to win power, that's so narrow. And we see it, people go into coalitions just to be in power, not to develop society and citizens.
Yeah. I think just a couple of days ago, or could have been yesterday, where a whole bunch of opposition parties announced their new coalitions, and it was quite striking that in the speech announcing these new coalitions across these different municipalities, the one thing that they were very proud about was that they had ousted the ANC. That they'd now come together, and in 2024 they are going to. It's a forerunner for 2024, and so again, this whole sort of oppositional perspective that they have on issues. Well, I mean, let's see how things go. I want to just take a quick break here. We are now 10 to 8. We've been going for almost an hour. We want to take a quick music break for the listeners. Listeners, if you are listening from home, wherever you're listening from on this Reconciliation Day, we are talking local government, new approaches to local government, new approaches to economic development on the local level. We're speaking to Andrew Boraine, who is the CEO of the Western Cape Economic Development Partnership. We're speaking to Daphne King, who is a veteran housing activist and also was in officialdom for a long time, educator, retired now, but has lots of insights from the inside and from being in the trenches across a few decades. She's got that kind of insight. And Stephen Langtree, who is with Cornerstone. We're going to come to Stephen again and talk maybe a bit more about social enterprise at Cornerstone and how that portfolio works to try and develop social enterprises and education at Cornerstone. And on the phone we've got Leslie Dikeni, who is the author of a book, sociologist, but he's an author of a book called Essay Development Perspectives, South African Development Perspectives in Question. We're having a sort of a very profound, deep discussion on all these issues. But right now I want to take a music break, and this song has been, if I was a music DJ, well, one would say this song has been blowing up the charts, this particular song. It's all over social media, YouTube, TikTok. It's called Big Flexer. And if you are anyone who wants to be in touch with popular culture right now, particularly now during December, this is the song that is going to be blasting across all the radio stations. It's by a Greek young gentleman who's actually a hip hop guy who's now gotten into this whole Amapiano space, which is blowing up across the world. I saw Will Smith doing Amapiano the other day, So it's really taking over the world. And this young man, Costa, is a Greek guy. Look for him, and the song Costa Tish, and the song is called Big Flexer.
Like Fokker, pull up in a beam, too much, too clean, young taller. Aye, don't foster, serious and daughter. A big time player, crib too big in Uganda. I went flexer, Tina said gym, too hot like a heater. My neck done froze like winter. Don't bet it on me. Liquor, yeah. Shades told me, picture. MJ on the sheet, thriller. Funny vibes every night. Enter, Nankalagata. Costa, yeah. I can style like Fokker. Huh. Pull up in a beam. Too much to clean, I'm taller. Aye, don't foster. Serious and other. Yeah, a big time player. A trip too big and Kanye. I went flexer. Yeah, Tina said gym. Yeah, too hot like a heater. My neck done froze like winter. Don't bet it on liquor. Yeah, Shades told me picture. MJ on the sheet, thriller. Funny vibes every night. I forget. Kupela diverse. To the full set, the Otama Yakajet, the Lebanon, but dance. Oh yes, my babies are oh yes. Oh yes, my babies are oh yes. For the future couple don't put a yarn, I don't make a dive. I forget. Kupela diverse. To the full set, the Otama Yakajet, the Lebanon, but dance. Oh yes, my babies are oh yes. Oh yes, my babies are oh yes. For the future couple don't put a yarn, I don't make a dive. Like Fokker, yeah. Pull up in a beam. Too much to clean, I'm taller. I don't foster. Serious and other. A big time player. Trip too big and Kanye. I went flexer, yeah. Tina said gym, yeah. Too hot like a heater. My neck done froze like winter. Don't bet it on liquor, yeah. Shades told me picture. MJ on the sheet, thriller. Funny vibes every night. Enter, Nankalagata. Costa, yeah. I can style like Fokker. Huh. Pull up in a beam. Too much to clean and taller. Aye, don't foster. Serious and other. Yeah, a big time player. A trip too big and Kanye. I went flexer, yeah. Tina said gym, yeah. Too hot like a heater. My neck done froze like winter. Don't bet it on liquor, yeah. Shades told me picture. MJ on the sheet, thriller. Funny vibes every night.
There we go, ladies and gentlemen. That is Costa Tish, who is the young man behind a song called Big Flexer. If you are someone who's been following popular culture lately and know that every December there's a big challenge always to have the biggest song of the December holiday season, and I would certainly. From my limited perspective on the matter, I would say that is definitely a contender to be the song for December 2021. In the studio with me, we're talking about service delivery, local government elections, local government, new approaches to local government in the wake of the previous, the recent local government elections. We've now seen that there've been new coalitions formed, very politicized across the board, really aimed at getting people out of power because people are unhappy with the levels of service delivery that they've been getting. And so into this vacuum have stepped new formations, new political formations, new parties, and really moving ahead and trying to, I guess, making promises to people that we hope they will deliver on. As we get into it, I want to turn to Stephen Langtree, who is at Cornerstone. He's the head of in the office of the executive dean, and really just talk about the Cornerstone perspective on leadership, because I know that one of the taglines of Cornerstone, which is the sponsor of this program, the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues, is this notion of servant leadership. Well, learning to change the world, number one, but really the question of being a leader, but not in the way that I think it's generally conceived, or that we really understand it. The sort of top-down leadership, which Andrew has just explained, is quite problematic. In the way that people apply it in South Africa. But Stephen, will you just perhaps explain why and where does this notion come from, and why is Cornerstone such a big proponent of it?
Well, I think to start off with, Ryan, I mean, the scale of some of the problems we're facing, not only in this country but in the world, is such that the sort of traditional approaches that we've tried are no longer relevant. I mean, every speaker has spoken about it already, Leslie in particular, and others, about how we can't just follow the traditional frameworks of trying to solve some of the problems we have, and we're looking at new ways of doing it. So I mean, well, just before I start with that, Andrew also mentioned earlier about how in '94 there was this expectation that when the new state came into power, the new government came into power, that somehow, all these problems of before '94 would be solved. And you saw lots of funds and energies and activists who were involved in other NPOs and organizations went into state to try and solve what they were trying to solve before '94 and try to solve it in the state. And we know about the disappointments that had followed. So different. I think what we believe and what many other institutions believe is that it's not solely going to be the responsibility of state, whether at whatever sphere of government, that's going to solve some of the challenges that we face. It will have to be solved at very many different levels. Different role players and actors will have to get involved. So we in particular are in the business of training people, students in particular, who will graduate and become leaders in their fields. So what we have, for example, is we've got a set of graduate attributes, of which servant leadership is one of it, which at the end of our a student's life at Cornerstone, they would have dealt with all of those attributes and have attained all those attributes through a program, a core curriculum of what we call general education, where they expose to different modules which deal with leadership, entrepreneurship, critical thinking, and so forth. And that's our contribution to try and sort of make those changes in the world, and also hopefully also in South Africa at local government level, at national and provincial level as well. And really, as I say, it is our contribution, because obviously on our own we can't do it, but we do sort of rely on.
Cornerstone now has 1,800 students, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of them online. So yeah. So if you are a listener out there and you actually want to, it sounds cheesy, but if you want to learn to change the world, which is the tagline, then think about applying to one of the courses at Cornerstone. You go to the website. One of the things that I think is, well, from my sort of limited perspective on the matter is I think that one of the gaps that South Africa, that we haven't addressed, is that South Africa doesn't have a cohesive, we don't as a society agree on a sort of a common set of values and ethics that we all agree on across the board, So what this means is that as long as we don't have the sort of common understanding of what we stand for as South Africans, I find that it becomes very easy to fall into sort of race politics and politics of xenophobia and all of these things. I mean, there was just a report that was released now based on a survey of thousands of South Africans, and one of the findings of the survey was that the people really, number one, don't trust government, or there's a huge decrease in trust of government institutions, as Andrew mentioned. But also one of the findings was that people, South Africans really have an issue with foreigners gaining access to local government services. So there's an increasing number of people, and you could obviously point to the fact that these attitudes then lead to xenophobic outbursts of violence and all of these things. But it leads again back to the notion of people feeling hard done by or shortchanged by local government, and therefore we need to have access as South Africans before everyone, before anyone else, and and so you then have these issues in the townships where people's shops get burned, and they get really terrorized, and often murdered and killed in cold blood. And so as long as we don't have a set of common values as South Africans, that we're always going to sort of fall into these problems. Would you agree with that, Daphne?
Yeah, I actually think that. Can I just say something on leadership? I think what South Africa and what our government has missed out on is the concept of servant leadership. That you lead to serve, not lead to earn money. That's the problem with people in power today. They feel that they got into this job in order to get themselves a Gucci bag and a Ferrari and a nice house in Constantia or wherever in Johannesburg.
Well, I understand what you're saying, Daphne, and I want to play the devil's advocate a bit here quickly. Like if you lived in the township, which is a very unpleasant place to live for a lot of the time, unsafe, dangerous issues, would you not see politics as a way of escaping from your material conditions?
Not necessarily. The 90% of the people in the township don't need a Gucci bag. They need services. They need leaders who will lead and who will serve. The point about
even if they do end up living in Constantia.
Yeah, but they need to serve. I mean, I was reading this morning in the Mail and Guardian. This new housing minister got rid of all the boards, all the regulatory authorities dealing with housing. Every board, SRA, whatever. Lindiwe Sisulu had appointed these people, and Lamini was her main man, her main person. And she appointed all these boards. And so this new minister, instead of examining what the boards are doing and why they're there, she just got rid of them all because Lindiwe introduced them. So it's not about service delivery. It's not about housing or about sewerage, building toilets for children in the rural areas. I mean, what horror. Can you imagine falling in a toilet and dying? And we still haven't done anything about it. Now, what minister can tell me that is servant leadership? They should have had people out there in the rural areas already dealing with every toilet in every school, in every province, in every town in this country. That is leadership. That is servant leadership. And you don't have to tell me. I come from Belgravia. I went to school at Athlone High. And I worked in Q-Town. I went to school in Q-Town and so on. So we grew up in situations where there wasn't a lot of money. At Christmas time, I would get a pair of school shoes because there wasn't money for fancy shoes. And at the beginning of the year, you must buy your own books. There were no free books and so on. So in a sense, we did. And I went into the city council as a politician, and I could have stayed there. I was acting mayor. I used to sit next to Andrew. In fact, I told him the other administrator is much better than him because he knows the city better. So Andrew couldn't bear. So I could have been the mayor if I wanted to. I could stay in politics, go to province, go to national department, go to national government.
But you were not in there. You're not doing it you were not a careerist. Let's put it that way.
And besides which, I wasn't gonna go with any. There were some decisions that they wanted to make which I felt didn't work for me, like keeping the executive 3 years in a row. There was a proposal by my party that we don't elect new EXCO people.
Which party are you?
It's fine. You can say, Daphne. It's okay.
What party
The word
I
was.
Yes, you can guess.
I can't guess. I hate guessing. I'm not a Sangoma.
I served the ANC as a councillor. And I've always been an ANC member. And I was a proud member of the ANC in the 70s and the 80s. And people like me made the ANC look good. At my school, people were conservative, and I was detained, and the security branch came to my school, and so on. And the teachers there became more aware of what was wrong with society simply because we were there. So we taught people in the community just by our presence and by who we were. And we were proud members of the ANC. Proud. We stood tall and we stood out. At the church, I ran the advice office, and I had to play bowls with some people in order to influence them and so on. But all I'm saying is that we were proud members of the ANC, all of us. My husband, all of us, including Andrew.
Yeah, Andrew.
Yeah. Confessions of an activist. Now, the point is, I still think that there's a lot that we can do. But as far as I'm concerned, what has happened, and I'm reading a book, Ivan Pillai's book at the moment, and I just read Joining the Dots, the book about Praveen Gordon's life. And when I look at what happened in Durban and activists and Operation Vula and whoever else, and I'm thinking, yes, man, we were there. We had this country in the palm of our hands, man. And in 1994, we stood tall, man. And as a nation, internationally, we were proud. Where is that pride? Just bring it back. You know, and that is what, it's not about greed. It's not about serving yourself. And please don't tell me, because I was poor, I now need to be rich. I deserve to be rich. That's crap. Sorry.
Okay. Thanks, Daphne. I would agree with you. I mean, I think that I think we've really lost an entire generation of people, and maybe even the spirit of, as you said, servant leadership. And you still find it in little pockets here and there, but I think it's really receded from the space, and people's reasons for being in politics or going to politics are really quite venal and self-centered. Maybe discussions like this are a way to open up those issues and give some hope. Leslie, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, no, I think we have to applaud Daphne for what she's saying. Absolutely. I could go ahead about my involvement in the revolution struggle, Operation Vula, and all those things. I've been involved as well in those things. And I think she's raising a very critical and important point, that the culture of the current ruling party and the liberation movement, which is supposed to be a state that is supposed to be intervening in these issues, is problematic. So let's accept it as such. Right, but
I wanted to say.
No. Can I just finish?
Yeah, let it finish. Yeah,
because there's another point that we are raising now on reconciliation, and these things are interlinked. But I want to start with Stephen. Stephen's point was very good. You see what Stephen is doing there, right? He's dealing with power, right, and saying how do we empower, right? And I hate to use the word empower because everyone talks about every councillor, politician from every political party now suddenly has learned the new buzzword of empowerment. And what is empowerment? Sometimes I don't think they even understand what empowerment is, right? Is empowerment only money and resources? Is empowerment not also the social consciousness of a being, right? So I think sometimes that some of our interventions as a state or even as NGOs or private sector, right, are missing the point. Because the assumption is that you empower people by giving them money. by throwing money into their pocket, or it's about money only, or it's about the actual, which is very critical and important though, the livelihoods of people. It's not about that only. It's also about the consciousness of how people start to think in society. Right? So when we look at development, we have to look at development in that holistic approach. The third thing I really want to talk about is, which really disturbs me, is at the level of the kinds of concepts, and Andrew, you must explain that to me, that we are using. I mean, the concept of a delusional state is a concept that we borrowed. It's not our own concept. That's why in the book I critique the concept of a delusional state, because it's a borrowed concept. It comes from Asia, and you can go and trace its historical existence as a concept. Right? It's not a concept that comes from South Africa. People borrowed something because we're in a crisis of having to deal with huge racial, historical inequalities in the country. So therefore, then we borrow concepts, we use them. We don't contextualize even those concepts, so that they should really be concepts that are developed out of the South African contradictions of society.
And another one was BEE, wasn't it?
BEE, another ridiculous concept. I mean, let's go back, and I think definitely would be able to understand this. Look, definitely I'll throw out a number of concepts that within the South African development discourse emerged. The first one was affirmative action. Right? And that's what populism, you were playing a song of populism earlier on, Ryan. It's a bit dangerous sometimes to be popular. You must listen to music wherever it comes from, Brooke Benton, wherever, it doesn't matter. Yeah. As long as it has substance and it has gained ground and for us to listen to. Not just something that comes. No, take post-1994. We are faced with these racial inequalities. We have to develop policies. First concept that people try to argue, try to introduce was affirmative action. Now, if I ask you, and any scholar, sorry, Andrew, let me touch on you, especially challenge Andrew on that one. Any scholar who must read the concept must always pose the question, what are the historical and the methodological basis of the existence of a particular concept? Because that question is a very critical concept, critical question. For you to be able to understand the concept that you use, what does it mean, and where was it created? Affirmative action is an American concept borrowed to be used in South Africa. Our context is different, definitely, as you would know. From 1912, we said South Africa belongs to all those who live. 1956, actually. 1912, the greatest liberation movement said South Africa belongs to all those who live in it. But it analyzed the racial inequalities and gave some kind of a foresight for how we need to transform society, South Africa, and for what South Africa should be. Where is that now? We introduced 1994 the concept of affirmative action, which is a concept that derives from North America, because in North America, blacks are a minority, whites are a majority, and that's a reality. I fail to see how we use that concept in the South African context, where blacks are in the majority and whites are a minority. I don't want to be accommodated. They must be accommodated by us, because we've got the power to do so. So the concept of affirmative action is a flawed concept for South Africa, but it does not mean that we should not develop and create a concept or concepts that can be able to deal with these historical racial inequalities in South Africa.
Leslie, I just want to stop you there quickly.
Can I finish? The problem is that
wasn't the RDP supposed to...
That's why I'm so strong about concepts. Is that concepts are there. It's a language that we use to transform and change society. Now, if you have a concept that is weak, like affirmative action, that is misinterpreted constantly, you will never be able to change these racial inequalities that we are dealing with.
Yeah, just quickly, I just want to...
Okay.
The RDP, I mean, I when I voted for the ANC in 94, proudly as a South African, one of the things that that really, in the years post 94, that really made me believe that we would be able to solve some of these contradictions and problems and challenges that we faced was the RDP, was this document that really kind of almost formalized the issues of the Freedom Charter, and really tried to address it and give it sort of some kind of practical form. That was then very, very soon after, a couple of, I don't know, when it was like 3 or 4 years later, was completely shelved in favor for some neoliberal policy document that was then imported from, I don't know, the Scandinavian countries, the social democrats in Western Europe, and completely replaced this sort of, people-centered development, macroeconomic development policy. And I mean, why was that decision taken? I mean, you as someone who was there and had some role in the authorship of that policy approach, I really thought that was, I mean, that for me was the beginning of my disillusionment with the party that I voted for.
No, because you're short-sighted, and you are missing the point yourself. You do not draw a link in the processes of how these policies were developed. Indeed, we have to talk about the Freedom Charter 1912. But before then, after that, you had the Harare Declaration that was adopted and set, right?
Yeah.
As some kind of a blueprint, which I disagree with, for what we should be like. And then after that, we had Ready to Govern, when the ANC said, now we must show that we can govern, and this is how we are going to govern.
Yeah.
That process led to the RDP. So we borrowed from that, right? But the fundamental principles that we used to work on before was that of the Freedom Charter, which was a document no one can deny had a foresight for how South Africa should look like. In terms of how you operationalize it is another story. But the fact that, because even Ready to Govern, even the Harare Declaration came from that. And then we had the RDP. And the RDP borrowed very strongly from those other three documents. Of course, there were many questions and debates that were taking place. But at some point, this is my critique, is that there were some people in the liberation movement who started saying, no, we must use these policies, affirmative action and BEE. I mean, let's deconstruct what affirmative action means. I've done it already. It's a concept that belongs to North America because the essence of affirmative action is to accommodate minorities, which is nothing wrong. It's good for North America, not for us. And in fact, we carried the moral high ground at the time because we were saying South Africa belongs to all those who live in it. There's no country, America, Africa, the Americas, or anyone in the world who would have came with that. We are the only one in the world. I lived in Paris for many years. I studied there. They could never, ever say that. The French will tell you, il faut que tu parles français parce que tu habites en France. Donc, c'est ça, c'est tout. Nationalism, the worst form of nationalistic Europe can never even try and say that. We are the only country. South Africa has always been a country that actually conceptually on these things, on the national question, on reconciliation, has always upped the bar. We have lowered the bar ourselves. And I think that's the kind of thing that Daphne is talking about. And that is the truth. We must stick to it. Stick to those principles. South Africa belongs to all those who live with it. But then address the racial, historical, colonial questions based on your concept. Because you have taught America. We have taught, I mean, where would America, have you heard Bush or anyone saying America belongs to all who live in it? No, they don't. They don't. You are the only one. That is a very important point we always have to make in the world. That's what made me win any intellectual debate. I say to them, when they talk about the national question, can you say what we have said in South Africa, which I'm proud of?
Yeah, well, I mean, all these are ideals, Leslie. I mean, are great ideals, great in theory and all of that. I mean, you were right, But I mean, on the ground, in practical terms, right now, you have a citizenry that is completely disaffected by government and towards government, and feels ignored and left out and overlooked and just basically shafted. I mean, this is the reason why people go out into the streets so often and burn things and try to destroy infrastructure, because they feel as if South Africa does not belong to them. They don't feel a part of this new South Africa, this rainbow nation. I mean, I've in recent weeks I've had the pleasure to meet some people who were part of the Fees Must Fall, Roads Must Fall movement. Young people, 25 years old, who feel completely disillusioned by how things have gone, and obviously they've taken another route to express their dissatisfaction with matters, joined more radical parties and all of that, and this again points to, I guess, the failure of the party that we voted for in '94 to really grasp this mantle of leadership. Maybe because the conception of leadership was this sort of top down, the guy at the top says how things should be. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, am I right?
I was just thinking though, just linked to what Andrew was also saying earlier about, I guess one can call it the vacuum that exists at local government. If you consider the fact that so many municipalities are dysfunctional. I mean, you made an example of someone who's been sent in by National Treasury to fix and I know of many of those examples. Isn't there actually, on the contrary, then a case for more top-down approaches in some of these cases, as opposed to less, because there's a vacuum, there's dysfunctionality. People are disappointed, disaffected. They want things to change. So wouldn't you argue, Andrew, that perhaps the state should be more interventionist in some ways, as opposed to less?
When there's chaos, when there's instability, you need to intervene to restore stability, because you can't do anything else. You can't run elections, you can't do community development, you can't do anything in conditions of instability. And so, and usually those interventions are top-down, just like National Treasury sending in an administrator to try and turn around a defunct council. I don't have a problem with that, because that's the reality. You've got to. What we have learned is that if a local area is unstable, if it's run by gangs and not by the community working with the local state, you cannot do anything other than live in fear. So you've got to stabilize the local area. But I think, Stephen, going back to your leadership question and tying it into some of the things that Leslie has raised. So firstly, I think it's good, Leslie, you're taking no prisoners and you're saying there's no holy cows. And I think, if I think back, Daphne, to the 70s and 80s, it was characterized in the movement by rigorous debates. People disagreed on lots of things, and we've lost that in the last 20 years. That debate has been muted, and anyone who's dared raise a contrary view to the sort of prevailing orthodoxy, which is very hierarchical and top-down and kind of aging, if I can put it that way, is banished. And we've got to allow more ideas to emerge and challenge the sacred cows. So I'm with you there. But what I would say is, whatever model we choose, and I always think, Leslie, I think it's going to be a combination of homegrown and borrowing ideas from everywhere. I think, yeah. So I don't have a problem of learning and borrowing globally, but it's got to be owned locally, whatever it is, wherever it comes from. And if people don't own it, and you don't own something if you don't develop it yourself. If it's imposed on you, if it's imported, that doesn't work. So I'm 100% with you there. But coming back, whatever we decide, whatever directions we want to go in the future in terms of a model of a state or policies and things like that, to deal with the worsening inequalities in our country. They're not getting better. We've gone backwards. Our Human Development Index has gone backwards. Our levels of stunting of children under 5 has gone backwards. It hasn't progressed in 5 decades. So we've got massive challenges there. But I think does go back to this issue of leadership, amongst other things. It's not, and I'm not just talking about leaders of political parties or in government. I'm talking about leaders in society as a whole, whether you're in business or community leaders or activists or in civil society organization or running a university or a big institution somewhere. And I think we've got to have ethical leadership. We've got to have collaborative leadership as opposed to winner take all, and I'm in charge, I'm going to tell you what to do, and you respect me because of my position and my title. That's sort of nonsense, because we've allowed that to creep in. That's a pretty foreign concept, I think. And then we need adaptive leadership to challenge we've been completely weighed down by bureaucratic tendencies in government and a bureaucratic culture, and we almost praise it. It almost has become our politics. It is substituted for a politics. You know, so who's got the cleanest audit now is the only sort of judgment that we give on government, and it's a lot of nonsense, quite frankly. So I think ethical leadership, collaborative leadership, and adaptive leadership, whatever model we call the state, you know, whether it's the developmental state or whether it's this policy or that policy, it's all about the quality of the people that are helping lead the implementation. And again, I'm not just talking about people at the top in a national government or national parliament. I'm talking about leadership at a grassroots level, as much as I'm talking about the kind of top-down leadership as well. Ethical, collaborative, and adaptive.
Thank you, Andrew.
Leslie,
do you want to say, respond?
Yeah, I want to make a point. Please allow it to happen. And I think the things what you're saying is this notion of thinking that transformation processes can be managed. I contend, as I put it in the book, that transformation processes cannot be managed. Right? That's a very conventional way of thinking. Right? Transformation processes are constantly reshaped through negotiations by individuals and groups involved in everyday life struggles in society. If our state and actors outside the state can begin to understand that and realize that and stop thinking, as I said earlier on, right, in this dichotomized way and homogenizing way. If those who are challenging the state currently can challenge the state and make their critiques sharp and clean and clear by not assuming that we are now within, and use all theories of critiquing a state that was a colonial state, but admit instead that we are in a post-colonial state and that our critiques should be to a post-colonial state. Because once you keep on saying, because of apartheid, you are giving the current actor, Daphne, in local government, in provincial, in national, wherever, room to maneuver. Because they will just blame, because 40 years of apartheid, therefore we cannot move from our developmental discourse. And that's what I think sometimes our commentators, so-called analysts, and so-called experts fail to understand. They keep on critiquing the current state as if it's a colonial state. That's wrong. Let's admit 1994 was a reality. It happened.
Let's move on. Do you want to respond,
No.
Daphne?
I wanted to say that the whole concept of empowerment, my understanding of that in the 70s and the 80s is that we empowered communities. I empowered the students I taught. I empowered the youth organizations that we brought into being. You empower community leaders in the areas. So empowerment doesn't necessarily mean gaining riches. It's about transforming your reality. And I think people should all get hold of Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed. It's about education, but it's not just about teaching people. He brought out a literacy program, which I used to teach domestic workers in the 70s, early 70s, and so on, where you actually teach people to empower themselves via their reality. So Paulo Freire enriches people not by the top-down approach, but by using their reality, teaching them to read and write, teaching them to how to run a union, how to organize a community program, how to, go to the city council. And he was Brazilian, so we need to look at other struggles. And Andrew mentioned that there are other struggles which we can look at. I like Guinea-Bissau. Amalka Cabral wrote a great book on two colonialisms, and so on. So there's lots of history. There's lots of history to be taught and to be learned, and how to empower people. By the way, the Freedom Charter was drawn up in 1955, not in 1912.
Yes. No, it doesn't matter. Sorry, that was the era of. That's like a typo writing. Please, not Jasmine. Come on.
I just needed to get that detail.
Yeah, you wanted to get something right on me. Yes,
Yeah.
I hear you.
No, I just needed to.
That's a weak point, Jasmine. Please carry on.
You've lost two marks in that next exam, Leslie.
No, what I'm saying is that empowerment is important. I think people must represent this whole idea of empowerment. And we are in a developmental state. We still need to go a long way in empowering our people. So we need to find that. And I like the topic, and Andrew hasn't even mentioned anything about what he does. How do we rescue the local government situation? I came up with a very radical idea. I know that, politics is always going to be there. But do we need 1,000 political parties? For God's sake. We don't need so many political parties. We don't need so many. So you've got your major parties and they're all fighting amongst each other. It's not about building houses and giving kids toilets or about sweeping the streets and so on. It's about, I got 2 votes. I'm the kingmaker. I'm the mayor. So and I want this and I want that as in positions that we must eradicate. Work on that. As far as I'm concerned, it's important that we look at reality. We don't have to what's the word?
Overcomplicate things.
Yeah. Just be practical. Think about Mrs. Poseidonout van Bontewil and Mochi Khalima van Hanover Park. She's sitting there in a backyard, man, and she's never gonna get a house because we just can't get it right.
All the red tape and political infighting and factions. Andrew, do you feel? Do you feel positive in the work that you do? When I discovered your organization and what you do, I thought, wow, this is absolutely amazing. This ability to bring people together across the spectrum and different interest groups together. Do you feel positive waking up every morning, going to work and doing some of these things? And maybe are there some practical interventions that you've made that are showing positive results?
Ryan, I don't wake up that way every day. There's often 2 steps forward and 1 step sideways and 3 steps back. And let's face it, there's a lot of people invested in not changing because they're benefiting from the current status quo, and they resist collaboration for all sorts of reasons.
Because maybe that will mean accountability.
Exactly. And there are some people who benefit from a lack of accountability in the system. So, but what I do, firstly, I think that every day I experience incredible social relationships and social capital being built on the ground by people in communities, often despite the state and not because of it. Sometimes there's an enabling state or an official or a politician. So I don't want to categorize everything, on one way or the other. But visiting on the ground the other day in Zwelithemba, just outside Worcester, with a bunch of officials, and hearing the head of department, which is quite a hierarchical position this was provincial government, and he got up and he said to the government delegation before we go in, he says, I just want to say one thing, we're going to listen twice and talk once. we are not here to talk and come with solutions for communities. We are here to listen and try and understand the problem from a community perspective rather than coming in with state-imposed solutions. And you know, that work, that attitude, and the whole delegation went in, and it was all three spheres of government working together. So that was a change. Mm-hmm. And they were working with networks of registered and unregistered ECDs in informal settlements, thinking, how does government empower, I'm going to use that word, enable, support, and not save, but treat every ECD as a small micro enterprise, usually black woman led in this country, looking after 20, 30, 40 kids. They are the building blocks of the new economy. And it was an incredible turnaround of how government was going in to engage with community. And the community response was very positive. So when I see that, I come out of that encounter and I think, gosh, there's hope for the future. When I see how people responded during COVID, with solidarity within communities, solidarity between communities that are often separated by apartheid geography of the past and present, that gave me hope for the future. When I see, and let me give you a state example. When I see national government coming up with something like the Social Employment Fund, which is targeting, it's going via civil society organizations that are big enough to contract with the state, but have grassroots enough contacts with people on the ground in conditions of informality. It's a fund of 800 million rand over the next 9 months. That's an incredible innovation that is being driven at this stage through the Industrial Development Corporation. I think that's a great reason for hope. It's not all doom and gloom. There's some really, really good projects outside of government. There's some good projects in government, and there's really good cases of people in government working with communities, working with small and informal businesses, working with academics and researchers and action and practitioners on the ground. So it's a mixed bag, Ryan. You know, I encounter all types.
No, but Andrew, you'll agree with me that what you are saying, like Eddie said, the minister himself, or whoever the official was, says to you, let's go and empower them. You know, there's an inherent assumption in the behavior of these officials that dismisses the whole notion of how they interpret power, because power is agency. I mean, agency exists everywhere. I have power, you have power. You cannot assume that you'll come to my community to think that you're going to empower me. First, you've got to recognize that in that community that you're going to, there's agency, there's power there. These people can think, they can revert to you and say to you, no, we agree or disagree with what step or whatever development you want to do. So that we have to think of power relationally, not to assume, ask God, you don't have. So I'm coming in there to empower you. That is one, you know, the cargo notion of a power, you know, of, we're coming in, we've got power, we're going to come and empower you. No, you must also think that I'm going there to be empowered. That relational gap of power because power is relative. Different people possess power in different ways. And that is, even it's anti-Paulo Freire, as you quoted earlier on, that notion. Paulo Freire didn't think like that, those communities in Brazil. No, Paulo Freire also insisted that, hey, when we go and we interact with these people, we come out of there with knowledge. Right? Which places another question around what constitutes knowledge.
But Leslie, can I think we're on the same page.
Knowledge as esoteric. We know, you don't know. I've got a degree you don't have. It's an absolute bedevilment of development, right? But if you assume, if you go in there and you say to yourself, knowledge is a social construct, different social actors in different levels of society, whether it's macro, micro, right? And in fact, you don't have to divide the macro and the micro, but you must see the accidental relations that exist between the macro and the micro. Then you'll be able to understand that there's no esotericism in power, in knowledge. a trade unionist has as much knowledge as I have, except that I had studied in Norway, in Holland, and in Paris. Right? But it doesn't mean that I've got a particular form of knowledge, but it does not mean that I possess a monopoly of knowledge. Hence, my argument in the book is that knowledge is a social construct, different social actors to their everyday life struggles, construct this through that process, deconstruct knowledge, and in that process, shape society. That is the analytical framework I stand in terms of knowledge and power, because development is about power.
Did you want to respond?
Well, I think I'm certainly not disagreeing with Leslie, and I think that the example I gave of a senior official going in and saying, we are not here to talk to the community or come and save them or empower them. We're here to listen, not talk. Listen with attentiveness. Listen with responsiveness. Listen with solidarity. They were showing up in a new way. And that's the opposite of the hierarchical top-down, let the mayor come in and solve everyone's problems and cut the red tape. And it's just, often these things are publicity stunts for the politicians or the government. But if you can get officials showing up and working with people in communities, and I'm talking about informal settlements at the most grassroots level in a different way. It's a totally different form of empowerment. And I think Leslie and ourselves are on the same page in terms of that. And agency and two-way mutual accountability. I think that's the starting point for this. It's not coming and giving people things. And for 25 years, we've had a state who've said, look how lucky you are. We've come to give out things, particularly near elections. We give out lollipops and you should be grateful. You are not citizens. You are subjects of the state. And that's just, that's medieval.
What we are saying in terms of a discourse, we enter into a discourse with the community. You know, because it then levels the playing field.
100%.
It says, I don't know, and I'm coming, you're going to teach me, I'm also going to teach you something. And sometimes, let's also be honest, it's a very liberal point of view to simply say that communities know all of it. No, they don't always. They must enter into negotiations and discussions with us. Right? But we have to be able to place ourselves at the same level of discourse with them.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to mention an incident, and it points again to some of the things that you were saying, Leslie. When I was when I spent some time in Holland, in the Netherlands, and I was lucky enough. I was there as a journalist, and I went to some talk by a guy whose job was to create social cohesion in a place where there were lots of immigrants who had come in from Suriname, and you know, to sort of get them to assimilate better into Dutch society. And I went to this talk with him, and I was really, I mean, for the first time at that point, I encountered a guy who seemed to me like a bureaucrat, a political appointee, but he was a bureaucrat. But he was such a dynamic person in that conversation, where it was really about his job. He explained to us was to find to get this community together, this community of immigrants who were there, recent immigrants, and really in those few square blocks where they congregate or tended to congregate, his job was to, for want of a better word, empower them in some way to assimilate better into society, and part of his work was to raise funds from private business, you know. So his job, he had this fund, he had these projects, and he had all this fun. And like, I mean, it was such a sort of maybe quite a Dutch practical, pragmatic approach to a problem. And I mean, this guy could have been in any position in the private sector, you know. And for me, that was the first time I really understood that this notion of the state as the sort of the bad state, or, you know, the bureaucrats are always terrible, and, you know, all this red tape was not the dominant notion, that the state could be a force for positive good in society, and not the sort of obstructive force that we'd been told it usually is. And so again, that also, you know, like you say, it leads you into arguments with people who sort of dismiss the state as always corrupt, as always inefficient, as always standing in the way of real development and progress, because it's not. I think it's as you say, a choice that we can make in terms of how we engage with people and proceed and get people on the same page and move forward. That brings us to 10 minutes to 9 o'clock. I want to take a quick break now. We've been talking, listeners, for a very long time about local government, issues of local government, issues of development and economic development, and gone into even the philosophical underpinnings of our understanding of development in the present time. And so I just want to take a quick break now. If you're going to stay for the next 10 minutes, I would really suggest that you stay tuned to Bush Radio if you're listening right now and you're enjoying this discussion, because after this, it's going to be Noel Daniels, the CEO of Cornerstone, in conversation with Rudy Bass, who is the executive dean at Cornerstone. He's going to be in an hour-long conversation in the program Community Champions. And it's just a short break that we're going to take so you can understand what Community Champions is all about. Community Champions is a new show on Bush Radio every Thursday at 9 p.m. Cornerstone Institute CEO Noel Daniels is the host and chats with various community champions about their life, their work, their struggles, and the music that inspires them to keep fighting for a better world. Conversational and laced with humor, the show is part of a new collaboration between Bush Radio and Cornerstone Institute, a private institute of higher learning in Cape Town, offering a range of on-campus and online programs in community development, psychology, business, and much more. If you're looking for inspiration on how to change the world, tune in to Community Champions on Bush Radio 89.5 FM with Cornerstone CEO Noel Daniels every Thursday at 9 p.m.
Bush Radio 89.5, man. Voila.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues. So we've gone into deep discussion around issues of local government. We know we've had local government elections a couple of months ago, and lots of changes ahead. New people in power, new people in charge of things, and really, as citizens of the country, we need to find new ways to engage with these people and each other. We are sitting with, as Andrew mentioned, it's no secret that we are sitting with huge challenges, especially at the end of COVID and 2 years of pandemic lockdowns and restrictions. Unemployment is rife. People are in crisis, even though we are celebrating not being in lockdown, but some of these problems have really deepened our inequalities the last 2 years, I would say. We're now in the last 10 minutes of the show. Stay tuned, as I said, for Community Champions after this with Noel Daniels. I'm going to ask everyone to wrap up now. Then we're going to play some Christmas music. We'll go around the studio, and then maybe just start with Daphne. Daphne, are there any final words that you want to leave with the listeners, or final points you'd like to make in this discussion?
I just want to say that local government should be led by people who are elected to serve, and not about politics and power. You know, that the voter counts. The voter is a person with dreams and needs, and when you stand there in front watching people vote for you and you are elected, then you are there to serve them, and to serve them well, with integrity and honesty, and just be there for people. Politics of being a councillor, being somebody in the province, being a national minister, is about serving people, and it's not about enriching yourself.
Yeah, being accountable to them rather than the party that you're a member of.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Stephen?
Sure. No, I mean, I think that just listening to the conversation, but also just over the past in a while, observing what's happening in the country. I think there's lots of problems. There's no doubt about that. We can't run away from that. But there's also lots of good work happening. I mean, Andrew's mentioned a few things, and one of the things that reminded me of that is when he mentioned the ECD. I mean, there's such a lot of ordinary people in small communities doing something very basic, like looking after people's children. Very often without state support, without formal support, they start doing it, but they're making a difference. So I think at local level there's a lot of things happening, and it's about pulling together and local communities doing things for themselves instead of just waiting for things to happen from state side, but also state being more responsive and also coming in and playing a part where it can. Yeah.
Leslie, do you want to say your final words?
Yes, I want to call upon, first of all, thank you very much. It was a very nice, vibrant discussion and debate. I think you need more of this, Ryan, and I think you need people like Daphne and all the colleagues there to be in these kinds of programs. My call, which is a clarion call for me now, is that the South African developmental discourse is pregnant with developmental challenges for developing a new concept, for developing new conceptual theories for development in South Africa, right? And we must rise to that challenge and use it effectively, because that will help in not only changing the South African developmental discourse, but the world conceptual discourse. It will influence that discourse, and we must become part of that process, and we can be pioneers if we like to. Last one is, in other words, what I'm trying to say now is that we need to accept that old orthodoxies of theoretical, ideological thinking have largely given way to new ways of conceptualizing the complexities and dynamics of social life in South Africa, but elsewhere in the world as well. We must not only look at as us getting it wrong. The world at large, sometimes many other countries in the world get it also, are losing it. And the challenge is for us in South Africa to use our challenges as a laboratory for creating new ideas.
Thank you, Leslie. Yes, I would echo those sentiments, and I agree with you. And thank you so much for coming onto the show. Hopefully you can be in Cape Town at some point soon, for maybe early next year. Hope to see you. And if people want to get your book, how can they get it?
They can get it from Amazon. They can get it from Exclusive Books. It's better to buy from me, because if you buy from Exclusive Books or Amazon, I only get 14%. So you can take my number, and then you can call me out. I'll supply the books myself.
Okay, fantastic. Then you get everything, and then it will come with an autograph as well.
Yes, it will come with an autograph. Just share the number to the viewers, so my number to them. Must I give my number?
Yes,
now?
Give your number. You're going to get inundated with calls.
My number is 071 378 8014. And you can Google me.
Yes, just repeat that number again for people who didn't get it. 071
378
378
8014.
8014. 8014. That's the number for Leslie Dikani if you want to get his book, South African Development Perspectives in Question, which asks us to relook at our accepted notions of what development is or should be in South Africa. Andrew, final words from you.
Thanks, Ryan. Well, firstly, Leslie, you must keep a copy, please. Ryan, a long time ago, there was a famous politician and political theorist, Antonio Gramsci, who pointed out that during any transition period, when the old is not dead and the new is not yet born, morbid symptoms abound. And I think we acknowledge that there are a lot of morbid symptoms that weigh on us at the moment. But what I would like to leave listeners with is that there are already many examples of doing politics differently, people showing up differently, where the seeds of the new are embedded in the ashes of the old. And if I look at how the Cape Town Together Community Action Network went about their response to COVID through hyper-local action, through solidarity across boundaries, and moving at the speed of trust, when I see how 70, 80 civil society organizations joined the Western Cape Food Forum and led the food relief effort, and now is looking at longer-term, more transformational aspects of the food and nutritional system, when I see how South African towns are turning themselves around, places like Secunda, where communities, business, and the municipality are starting to work together to change the way in which those towns are run. Sondays River Valley, Clan William, in the Cedarburg. I mean, those are signs of hope. Those are signs of the new embedded in the ashes of the old.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Andrew, and everyone who's joined me, who's been in the studio with me. And if you're listening at home, thank you so much for listening. It's almost Christmas, people. And if it's Christmas, you know this song.
Feliz
Unlearning proposes that new ways of learning can only be acquired when individuals unlearn those thoughts, those emotions, and those behaviors that prevent us from fully flourishing in the world.
2 weeks into this course, my heart already knew that my entire viewpoint on humanity was going to change.
During the years that I've worked with Taryn, she has assisted me in seeing the potential as an individual, and the course has changed my life for the better. I am the person that I am today because of the course that I enrolled for.
I've been lecturing the content for 7 years, and every year I am in awe of students who share how the content has transformed them both academically and personally. I believe that the world right now is in desperate need of an education that equips individuals with both academic and personal development skills.
Before this course happened, I used to hate people from the bottom of my soul. But after this course, for the first time in my life, I can say that I no longer hate people. I can finally say that I no longer see people for their circumstances, but rather for who they are as people and who they can become.
The things that I learned in my early childhood about who I was not and who I was supposed to be. However, the course showed me the true identity of myself. It showed me that it was okay to be vulnerable. It showed me that it was okay to heal. And throughout the course, I have grown tremendously.
And the unlearning course does that. I realized that the content was so powerfully transformative that it would be irresponsible, that it would be selfish for me not to share it with the world. Unlearning is really a course that I've been lecturing for 7 years, but I've made it bigger, I've made it better, and I'm excited to incorporate the performing arts. I do not believe that unlearning needs to be clinical and boring. We can also make unlearning entertaining and fun.
To anyone that would want to enroll in this course, it will not only benefit you academically, but also individually. It will assist you in presenting yourself as the true individual that you are, but it will also assist you in healing and journeying the life process.
This course was the missing puzzle piece that I needed in my journey of self-transformation and self-discovery. And most of all, this course taught me how to unlearn this toxic behavior and how to choose happiness and positivity in the present and to stop worrying about tomorrow.
The gift of this course is that it is universally applicable to any personal and professional contexts. Cornerstone, learn to change the world.
In this time of great uncertainty, there's one thing you can be certain of: your education. Our wide range of online programs let you upskill yourself and earn a leading-edge qualification from the comfort of your own home. We've been educating Africa for 50 years, so we know how to adapt to our forever-changing landscape. Learn to change the world and take control today. Speak to one of our student advisors. Visit cornerstone.ac.za to enroll now.